When millionaire Ronald Vinci first met flight attendant Katherine Pedi, he felt an instant connection. Their unexpected encounter in the air would go on to significantly influence their future. Born on August 16, 1940, in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Ronald Vinci showed an entrepreneurial drive from a young age. In his 20s, he launched his first business by renting a space on the Pacific Coast in San Diego to sell Honda motorcycles. Eventually, his small shop grew into one of California's largest Honda dealerships. Ron's achievements didn't stop there. He expanded by opening additional car dealerships, consistently growing his wealth. Those who worked with Vinci often described him as determined and strong-willed, with a demanding approach to management. Ronald's personal life included a previous marriage to Pamela, with whom he had a son, Carrie. However, their marriage ended in divorce after several years. After the split, Ron embraced a luxurious lifestyle and spent his fortune on indulgent pursuits. He developed a keen interest in collecting airplanes and helicopters, even acquiring a large hangar to store his collection. Ronald lived in a grand home in Rancho Santa Fe, California, and went to great lengths to secure permission from the county commission to build a helicopter pad on his property, despite opposition from neighbors. This allowed him to travel conveniently by helicopter directly from his home. Additionally, helicopter pads were installed on the roofs of his car dealerships to facilitate aerial commutes. In 1990, 50-year-old Ronald Vinci crossed paths with 34-year-old Katherine Pedi in a chance meeting aboard a flight. Katherine, a flight attendant, hailed from a tight-knit family and was raised in rural Georgia. In her youth, she participated in beauty pageants and captivated others with her charm and elegance. With her radiant smile and magnetic personality, Katherine attracted many admirers. After completing her education, she worked as a lab technician in a veterans hospital for several years. Yet, she longed for more, and in 1980, she made a bold career shift, leaving the hospital to become a flight attendant with Delta Airlines. At that time, her annual income was $20,000. She enjoyed her new job, tending to passengers' needs and serving meals. Katherine even had some practical knowledge, like using coffee grounds to eliminate unpleasant odors, a handy tip for dealing with spills on airplane seats. In 1990, a decade after starting her flight attendant career, Katherine had a fateful encounter on a flight. She met Ronald Vinci, a millionaire who was immediately drawn to a charming and ever-smiling personality. Despite the significant 14-year age gap between them, the two began a romantic relationship. Katherine then left her career as a flight attendant and moved into Ronald's luxurious home in California. They shared a passion for travel, often visiting Aspen, Colorado, a favorite getaway spot for them. Their relationship spanned 10 years, during which Ronald never proposed to Katherine. Eventually, they chose to part ways. Seeking a fresh start and new companionship, Katherine relocated to Florida in April 2001 at the age of 45. She began a relationship with 63-year-old Dilo Corano, an insurance agent who was financially well off. The couple met through mutual friends. Katherine confided in Dilo about her previous relationship with Ronald Vinci, describing it as tumultuous and unhappy. She revealed that during the decade-long relationship with Ronald, she endured insults from him and had to deal with his heavy drinking and public discussions of his affairs with other women, all while hoping for a marriage proposal that never came from Ronald Vinci. On the contrary, wasted no time and swiftly proposed to Katherine. The couple tied the knot in May 2001, just a month after they first met. Katherine seemed very happy with the marriage. After their wedding, they began living together in Miami Beach, Florida. Dilo described Katherine's early demeanor in their shared life as resembling that of a domestic cat. Gentle, calm, and quiet with minimal eating habits. Furthermore, Katherine had a profound fear of water. She couldn't bathe in the ocean or river without experiencing intense anxiety upon entering the water. A few months into their marriage, Dilo began to notice a significant change in his wife's behavior. She increasingly requested money from him, demanding funds for clothes and gifts, while comparing him to her friends' more generous husbands. Dilo estimated that Katherine was withdrawing approximately $55,000 monthly from him. She used educational expenses as an excuse but failed to provide receipts or evidence of such expenditures. After several months of enduring this financial strain, Dilo decided he had rushed into the marriage and wanted a divorce. Given their lack of children or shared property, the separation was relatively straightforward. Court documents revealed that Dilo Corano had a net worth of $4,500,000, whereas Katherine had only $8,000 in her accounts. As Katherine prepared to move out of Dilo's house, she expressed sadness and despair, lamenting, "What's the point of living? I don't succeed in anything. There's just no meaning in my life." In 2005, Ronald Vinci, a millionaire, made a significant life change by relocating to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Convinced by friends that Florida offered favorable climate conditions and low taxes at this point, Ron had already sold his car dealerships and accumulated substantial wealth. In Fort Lauderdale, he acquired a luxurious apartment on the 4th floor, enjoying his new residence's comforts. In the same year, Ronald rekindled his relationship with Katherine Pileggi. Katherine, the flight attendant Ron had previously dated, moved into his apartment, rekindling their relationship. Interestingly, Katherine's ex-husband, Dilo Corano, also lived in the same building, but was situated 30 floors below them. Dilo couldn't comprehend why Katherine chose to reconnect with the millionaire she once described as a monster. As their relationship progressed, Katherine became increasingly fixated on marrying Ron. Both Ronald and Katherine were no longer working and led a leisurely lifestyle. Their differences became more evident over time. Ronald was overweight and enjoyed indulging in rich foods. In contrast, Katherine maintained a weight of only 42 kilograms by eating sparingly. Ronald loved lively parties, while Katherine preferred staying home absorbed in crime stories. She rarely wore dresses, opting for shorts and sneakers instead. The couple often traveled together, crossing the sea by boat and visiting Caribbean islands by air. Despite her fear of the ocean, detailed in her diary entries, Ron incessantly encouraged her to conquer her phobia. Even though Ronald possessed considerable wealth, he had a penchant for frequenting budget-friendly bars along the Fort Lauderdale waterfront with friends. There, he would order 1 tacos and strong drinks. He might have been the life of these gatherings, flirting with women, but he often humorously remarked that his appeal to men had long vanished. Their home frequently hosted gatherings where Ronald indulged in alcohol and grew more outspoken. Occasionally, he publicly insulted Katherine in front of their friends, implying she owed everything to him. At these events, Katherine usually played a passive role, quietly catering to Ronald's intoxicated demands, serving drinks and snacks, and attending to his friends' needs. This dynamic painted a clearer picture of their contrasting personalities and relationship intricacies. Ron's extroverted indulgence versus Katherine's introverted submissiveness. For 5 years, this pattern persisted. However, the millionaire remained hesitant to propose marriage to Katherine. By 2010, Ronald began confiding in friends about his desire to end the healing and seek a younger companion. In early 2011, Ronald Vinci found himself hospitalized due to severe intestinal issues. These issues were most likely stemming from years of alcohol abuse. The doctors attributed his illness to alcohol consumption, but Vinci noted a recent shift in the taste of his food. A friend jokingly suggested that maybe Katherine had tried to poison him. Ronald dismissed this jest without much thought. In reality, Ronald had neglected his health. His excessive alcohol intake and the habit of consuming numerous pills for relaxation and better sleep were taking a toll on his well-being. In June 2011, Ronald Vinci made a significant purchase, acquiring a new waterfront home in Fort Lauderdale valued at $3 million. Conveniently located just steps away from where his yacht was docked, the property promised comfort. At the age of 70, Ronald looked forward to spending the rest of his life in this residence. He eagerly anticipated visits from his only son, Carrie, and his grandson. Carrie's occupation as a waiter was a subject of jest for Ronald, who humorously claimed that Carrie was eagerly anticipating his father's passing. On the afternoon of June 28, 2011, the gardener of Ronald Vinci made a distressing call to 911, reporting an incident involving his employer. When the police arrived at the scene, they discovered the lifeless body of the millionaire in a guest bedroom. Shockingly, his body had been meticulously wrapped in plastic bags, tightly taped, and placed inside a sleeping bag along with soiled sheets. And on top of it all was a substance resembling wet dirt, later identified as coffee grounds. Further examination revealed a slashed mattress beneath the blanket on the bed. The gardener informed the police that according to Katherine Pileggi, Ronald had fallen down the stairs, suffered a head injury, and subsequently passed away. The officers had deep suspicions that Ronald Vinci's death was not accidental. During police interrogation, the gardener provided a chilling account of the events leading up to the discovery of Vinci's lifeless body. According to his testimony, Katherine Pileggi had called him late at night, urgently requesting his presence at Vinci's residence. Upon his arrival in the morning, he was confronted with the sight the millionaire's body wrapped tightly in a sleeping bag in one of the guest bedrooms. Katherine, distressed and tearful, implored the gardener to assist her in burying Ron. She revealed that Vinci had expressed a lifelong wish to be laid to rest in the ocean after his demise. To carry out this plan, she had purchased a blue container intended to hold Vinci's body with the intention of taking it out to sea using the millionaire's yacht. By the time the gardener alerted authorities, Katherine had already brought this container home and placed it in the garage. Upon conducting a thorough examination, the medical examiner made gruesome findings. Ronald Vinci, aged 70, had sustained 9 stab wounds to his chest and neck. He bore marks consistent with hammer blows on his head and had ultimately met his demise from a gunshot wound to the head. On June 27th evening, Ronald Vinci's friends visited his house. Katherine prepared the meal, and Ron provided drinks during their gathering. During dinner, Ron mentioned that his passport and one of his pistols were missing. He also complained that the food tasted unusually bitter. Unexpectedly, Ron, who was known for staying up late, said he wasn't feeling well and went to bed as early as 7:30 p.m., an unusual time for him. His friends eventually found this early bedtime odd and left his house afterward. Katherine Pileggi, aged 54, was brought in for questioning a few hours later, where she provided a detailed confession. She recounted events around 1 a.m., shedding light on what transpired that fateful night. On June 28th, a drunk Ronald Vinci woke up and began verbally insulting Katherine. The situation escalated as he chased her down the stairs, stumbled and fell, hitting his head severely. Katherine claimed she helped him up and guided him to a guest bedroom on the first floor. Afterward, she cleaned the bloodstains on the stairs. A few hours later, she entered the guest bedroom to check on Ron, finding him asleep with a loaded gun on the nightstand. Fearing that Vince intended to kill her, Katherine acted out of fear and desperation. She grabbed the gun and fatally shot him in the head. During interrogation, Katherine admitted she was very scared and angrier than she had ever been before, feeling like her soul had left her body. After the shooting, she inflicted numerous additional wounds on Ron, using a knife and a hammer. Katherine then wrapped his body in a bag and attempted to conceal the evidence by calling the gardener when she realized she couldn't dispose of the body alone. Surveillance camera photos showed Katherine purchasing a large blue container at a hardware store after the murder. This container was intended to be used for disposing of Ronald's body in the ocean. Authorities discovered a gun matching the one used to shoot Ronald in Katherine's car with her fingerprints on it. Her Bentley also contained incriminating items such as a knife, cut-up pieces of a mattress, clothing, and rubber gloves, all stained with Ronald's blood. Consequently, Katherine faced a charge of first-degree murder and was subsequently arrested and detained. Further investigations revealed that just a month before the murder in May, Katherine had been involved in a legal dispute, wherein her sister accused her of borrowing money but refusing to repay it. Katherine defended herself by claiming that the money was a gift, and therefore refused to return it to her sister. On May 17th, the court ruled in favor of Katherine in this dispute. Ronald's neighbors reported hearing screams from Vinci's house on the night of the crime. Additionally, a witness spotted a white car with a large trailer near Vinci's home early in the morning. This car belonged to the gardener. Ronald Vinci's friends disclosed that he had been contemplating ending his relationship with Katherine for quite some time. The couple had not been intimate for several months, and even slept in separate rooms within their large house. Just a few weeks before the tragedy, attempted to give Katherine $1 million through one of his workers, requesting her to leave his house permanently. Prosecutors believed that Katherine's primary motive was the fear of losing her wealthy partner. However, Katherine's defense argued that she had been a victim of severe abuse during her relationship with Ronald and acted in self-defense. Questions arose regarding why she did not immediately contact the police, why she did not tell the truth right away, and why she endured the alleged abuse for years without leaving him. Some of Katherine's relatives defended her in court, and a court psychiatrist identified some signs of domestic violence. Nonetheless, none of Ronald's close associates could confirm witnessing any mistreatment in their relationship. They described Katherine as calm and noted that she never complained about her life. During the court proceedings, Katherine made a startling accusation against Ronald Vinci, claiming he was responsible for the sudden death of her younger sister Angela 3 years prior in December 2009. Katherine, Ronald, and Angela had embarked on a Caribbean cruise together. Angela had been struggling with substance abuse issues and consumed excessive alcohol during a party on the cruise, leading to severe illness and intense convulsions. In an effort to help her sister, Katherine performed artificial respiration. Tragically, Angela's heart stopped beating, resulting in her death. It later emerged that Ronald had provided Angela with some pills on the evening of the cruise, presumably to help her relax. Katherine firmly believed these pills were a contributing factor in her younger sister's death. In 2014, a jury found Katherine PGI guilty of the murder of Ronald Vinci. Consequently, she was sentenced to 25 years in prison. She is currently serving her sentence at the LEL Correctional Institution in Marin County, Florida. Her potential release date is set for January 2034, when she will be 77 years old. The story of successful and wealthy Ronald Vinci took a tragic turn due to his ill-fated relationship with quiet and unassuming flight attendant, Katherine PGI. Despite his many wise decisions in life, this particular relationship ultimately proved to be a fatal error for the millionaire. A wealthy businesswoman, weary of loneliness and with a substantial fortune, crossed paths with a charismatic anesthesiologist who dreamed of finding his perfect match. From their first meeting, a whirlwind of passion ignited between them. Yet, not everyone shared in the joy seen in the eyes of this enamored couple. Deborah, the central figure of our story, is an elegant, accomplished, and very wealthy woman. Her millions were not a stroke of luck but the outcome of her relentless dedication and hard work. She spent years climbing the ranks in the interior design field, eventually establishing her own design firm, Ambrosia. Over 3 decades, Deborah poured her heart and soul into this business, driven by a deep love for her craft. Yet, her personal life was far from as successful. Although she married 4 times, each marriage ended in divorce. Despite being a devoted mother to her 4 children, her romantic relationships repeatedly faltered. Having secured her financial future, Deborah longed for something more meaningful, the simple joy of family happiness. Her life took a dramatic turn after a family tragedy years ago, when her older sister, Cindy, was killed by Billy Vickers in March 1984. During the trial, their mother testified in support of Billy, leading to a lenient sentence for him, and he spent only a few years in prison for the brutal murder. Billy and Cindy had 2 children, and the event left deep scars on everyone involved. Afterward, Deborah struggled with extreme anxiety and panic attacks, particularly fearing firearms. Living alone for a long time only exacerbated this. Despite friends encouraging her to buy a gun for protection, Deborah couldn't bring herself to have a weapon in her home. Deborah always took great care of her appearance and surrounded herself with beautiful things. She invested considerable time and money in skincare, makeup and hair care at this point in her life. She owned a variety of stylish items, including Chanel jewelry, Cartier watches, denim clothing, and Gucci shoes. The only thing she lacked was a devoted partner. John Mayan, a central character in our narrative, was born on February 3, 1958 in California. He grew up alongside his sisters Karen and Donna. His father, known for his deceitful and fraudulent behavior, imparted these traits to John early in life. John became involved in deceptive schemes and fraudulent activities to make a living. Additionally, he dealt in illegal substances and used them himself, which led to multiple confrontations with law enforcement and his eventual banishment from California in 1988. John completed his undergraduate studies at Arizona State University, earning a Bachelor of Arts degree. Later on, he joined the University of Dayton's law faculty. His friends nicknamed him Dirty John due to his ability to effortlessly attract women. John was notably handsome, standing around 6 feet 3 inches tall with hazel green eyes and thick dark hair. His engaging smile particularly appealed to women. After completing his academic journey, John met Tanya Sells, a nurse anesthetist by profession. They got married in November 1990 when she was 25, and he was 31. Their relationship was fundamentally based on falsehoods, as John kept Tanya isolated from his family, alleging their malevolence. Tanya supported her husband while attending medical school in Tennessee and helped him obtain his license as an anesthesiologist. The couple had 2 children. However, over time, their marriage began to deteriorate. Tanya discovered from John's mother and sisters that he had been deceiving her about his past. She also found his secret stash of pills stolen from patients in need, pills he himself was addicted to, which explained his temper. Tanya promptly reported this to the police. Following an investigation, John admitted to all charges but chose to flee the state instead of turning himself in to authorities. He took refuge in a Michigan hotel, where the police easily located him. John was found unconscious surrounded by empty pill containers, prompting them to summon an ambulance. While en route to the hospital, he regained consciousness, seized a medication vial, and leaped from the ambulance but was apprehended soon after. Subsequently, he received a 6-year prison sentence in Michigan for resisting arrest and illegal drug possession. However, remarkably, John served only 17 months behind bars. He somehow managed to have his sentence reduced and was freed in 2004. During this period of his life, he met Deborah. She was 55 and he was 59. They both decided to try online dating, which is how they eventually crossed paths. Deborah was impressed by John's online profile. He described himself as a divorce doctor and a Christian searching for love. After a series of disappointing dates, Deborah was pleasantly surprised when she met John. He showed genuine interest in her life, praised her accomplishments, and seemed different from others. Their first date happened in October 2014 at a restaurant called Houston in Irvine, California. John's aim was to captivate Deborah, and he did so by sharing fabricated tales of his past, like working with Doctors Without Borders in Iraq. He mentioned having 2 children and owning multiple properties. Deborah envisioned him as a selfless doctor devoted to global service. John treated her like royalty, which was exactly what Deborah longed for after seeking companionship for so long. He even expressed eagerness to meet her family. His charming words made Deborah's heart flutter. After leaving the restaurant, they ended up at her penthouse. However, John overstepped boundaries that night. After a few kisses, he tried to escalate things further. Deborah felt uncomfortable with the pressure and asked him to leave. The next morning, John sought to amend his mistake. He called Deborah to apologize, explaining that he had consumed too much alcohol and couldn't contain his emotions. This admission once again raised John's standing in Deborah's eyes, leading them to continue their dates. As their relationship progressed, Deborah and John spent more time together. On their 3rd date, John declared his love and proposed. Deborah was so delighted by their companionship that she overlooked several peculiarities about him. For instance, John consistently wore well-worn medical scrubs, even at stylish events organized by Deborah, and claimed he had no time to change into more appropriate attire. Deborah was unfazed and proudly introduced him as her doctor to friends, posing with him for photos. Their bond deepened, and soon, they decided to move in together. Deborah's daughter Justine, who lived with her in the penthouse, was forthright and critical of her mother's partners. She disapproved of John's unkempt appearance, finding it strange that her mother, usually dressed in Gucci, was involved with someone in dirty robes. Jacqueline also noticed John's peculiar interest in the penthouse's art, statues, and paintings, as if he were evaluating their worth. After just 5 weeks of knowing each other, John convinced Deborah they should live separately. They rented a house for $6,500 a month on Balboa Island's waterfront in Newport. Deborah paid $80,000 upfront for several months' rent, while John avoided putting his name on the lease due to tax complications. Deborah was so enamored with John that she covered all expenses herself without informing her children. She couldn't understand why they disapproved of him, as he pampered her like royalty. Preparing morning coffee, doing grocery shopping, and striving to simplify her life, Deborah felt she had found her perfect match in John, and hoped that over time, her children would warm up to him. Envisioning a harmonious family future, Deborah arranged for John to meet her younger daughter Tara, who was known for having a softer disposition compared to Jacqueline. Tara resided in Las Vegas with her boyfriend, and upon hearing about John over the phone, decided to meet him in person. Tara's visit coincided with Deborah and John's move into their new residence. From their first encounter, Tara felt uneasy about John. His lack of cordiality, combined with his silent, solitary efforts in moving belongings, trying to project a tough exterior, didn't sit well with her. Despite reservations, Tara was willing to give John the benefit of the doubt, yet quickly began observing some concerning signs. John didn't own a vehicle, and although he claimed to have properties in Newport Beach and Palm Springs, he never suggested relocating or even invited them to visit. John appeared to spend most of his days at home, often engrossed in video games. Just before Thanksgiving, Tara decided to snoop through her mother's boyfriend's belongings and found a nurse's certificate with his name, realizing he was not a doctor. When John found out about this, he became furious and threw a massive tantrum. He accused Tara of trying to deprive her mother of happiness, shouting that she wouldn't succeed in separating them, while Deborah just stood there listening. Eventually, there was a big argument and Tara left the house. John used the situation to convince Deborah that her children were only after her wealth. They were waiting for her demise, and thus didn't want to see her happy. On the eve of Thanksgiving, Deborah's mother Arlene, a very religious woman, arrived. John put on an entire religious act in front of her, but received another scandal instead of approval. The holiday ended in another fiasco. Subsequently, Deborah opted to seek guidance from a psychotherapist, who recommended establishing limits with her offspring and pursuing a tranquil existence, a suggestion she embraced. She and John made Balboa Island their home, indulging in local eateries, strolling about, and relishing the picturesque views. At times, John exhibited youthful exuberance, capturing bare-chested selfies and sharing them with her, engaging in playful activities which rejuvenated her spirit. Deborah was immensely joyful, yet remained apprehensive about John's attire. His wardrobe was limited to aged medical scrubs, loose frayed trousers, and worn-out shirts, whereas Deborah desired her partner to be fashionably attired and complement her way of life. John claimed his finer garments were pilfered during a stint in Iraq. Hence, Deborah escorted him on a shopping spree, acquiring a complete set of high-end designer outfits for him. In early December, John accompanied Deborah on a work-related trip to Las Vegas. By this time, their acquaintance was just under 2 months old, yet they chose to marry. Deborah concealed this development from her children. On one occasion, an unknown woman managed to enter John and Deborah's residence. John seized this incident to persuade Deborah of the need for enhanced security measures. Subsequently, he set up multiple surveillance cameras within their home, which he operated via his smartphone. He extended this surveillance to his wife's office, aiming to monitor her activities. John's objective was to exert total control over their environment. Gradually, Deborah began to inquire about his family background and previous life. For each query, John had an immediate justification or excuse. Despite noticeable inconsistencies, Deborah chose to ignore them, convinced she had met her ideal partner. However, her children remained skeptical. Jacqueline took the initiative to investigate John's activities. Since he didn't own a vehicle, he utilized Deborah's Tesla. Jacqueline installed tracking devices on the car to monitor his whereabouts, but this surveillance didn't reveal anything significant. Then she and Tara engaged a private investigator. The detectives soon returned with findings. They uncovered that John had declared bankruptcy, possessed a nursing license but not one for practicing medicine, and had resided in Arizona, Ohio, Indiana, Tennessee, and California. One address associated with John was the Orange County Jail. When the daughters shared these discoveries with their mother, Deborah asserted that even if these facts were accurate, her affection for him would remain unchanged. In late March, a letter intended for John was received by Deborah. The sender was a former prison inmate, but she couldn't read it, as John quickly grabbed the letter from her. Initially, he accused her of mistrust with a burst of anger, then claimed it was from a pen pal whom he was supporting emotionally. Deborah felt uneasy about this explanation. The following day, with her husband away on work, she decided to sift through his belongings. This search unveiled startling truths about the man she had wed. She discovered that John was an ex-nurse anesthetist who had succumbed to an addiction to pain medication, leading to his arrest and the collapse of his professional life. Additionally, Deborah uncovered evidence of his history as a swindler. Court records revealed that John had previously cheated and stolen from numerous women. He stumbled upon some court files online. They included a search warrant for his storage unit. Inside the unit, authorities found a .38 caliber handgun, bullets, a GPS tracker, syringes, and other suspicious items. That was the moment Deborah realized John's true identity. He was a dangerous individual and an armed felon. He had several restraining orders against him from different women. Most alarmingly, she discovered he had been released from prison on October 8th and met her just days later. Feeling overwhelmed by these revelations, Deborah examined the documents meticulously. She felt both shocked and scared. She realized the potential danger John posed to her and her children. Choosing to act normal temporarily, Deborah waited for the right moment. When John left for the hospital due to back issues, she seized the opportunity. With her family's help, she moved out during his absence. During the packing process, they found more documents belonging to John. These were prints of online comments from other women warning about him. They described John as persuasive and adept at deception. They cautioned others not to be swayed by his attractiveness and charm. Convinced of his instability, Deborah decided to end their relationship and leave. Despite her decision, John kept messaging her, pleading for her to visit him in the hospital. Overcome with guilt, Deborah relented. By June 2015, John had successfully persuaded Deborah to reconcile with him. He offered many justifications for the oddities found among his possessions. He admitted he had hidden his past because he believed a woman like her wouldn't have noticed him otherwise. For this reason, he pretended to be a doctor to impress her and now implored her help in rehabilitating and salvaging his life. Still enamored with him, Deborah granted him another chance. They relocated together to a new apartment in Irvine. However, this decision deeply troubled her children, leading the couple to maintain some distance from them temporarily. By March 2016, the couple had been married for a year already. For 3 months, Deborah helped John recover from his addiction. However, she was deeply distressed because her entire family disliked him, especially Justine. This animosity was mutual. Matters escalated to the point where her husband forbade Deborah from seeing her daughter. When John discovered that Deborah was paying for Jacqueline's real estate lessons, he reacted spitefully. He called the school to slander Jacqueline in front of her teachers and wrote her threatening and indecent messages, insisting that her mother no longer wanted anything to do with her. He even threatened that one day he would come and harm Jacqueline. It became evident that while John appeared to be recovering, his malevolence and cruelty were intensifying. By April 2016, Deborah's patience had reached its limit, prompting her to file for divorce. She sought a peaceful dissolution of the relationship and began gradually withdrawing money from her bank account for safekeeping. Unfortunately, she kept $30,000 in a hiding place in one of the lower drawers at home. When John discovered this money, he asserted that it belonged to him as well. Realizing that divorce proceedings were imminent, John started showing more aggression. Sensing the danger, Deborah knew it was time to flee. She took some cosmetics and work items and moved to Jacqueline's apartment in Irvine, a location she felt safe due to numerous surveillance cameras around the complex. Deborah attempted to obtain a restraining order. However, the Orange County judge denied her request, since there was no immediate threat. John lived in another state and hadn't made any direct recent moves against her. With little recourse, she focused on breaking off the relationship and moving on. After the separation, John relocated to one of Deborah's properties in Nevada. He repeatedly tried contacting her, but she consistently ignored his calls. Then things took a drastic turn on June 11, 2016. That day, as Deborah drove her Jaguar to work, an alarming incident occurred. Her car was stolen from the parking lot while she was at the office. The vehicle was soon found only about a block and a half away, drenched in gasoline, but not set on fire, resulting in only minor damage. Security footage from the area clearly identified John Mayan as responsible for the theft attempt, a stark reminder of his continued threat and volatility despite living in another state. On the evening of August 20th, 2016, Tara came home from work and parked in the lot. As she got out of her car, John suddenly appeared. He attacked her with a knife, trying to drag her back into the vehicle. Screamed for help during the struggle. When John covered her mouth, she bit him hard. A fierce struggle erupted right there in the parking lot. Tara, wearing heavy boots, managed to kick her assailant and knock the knife from his grasp. Seeing a chance, she grabbed the knife and repeatedly stabbed John. She delivered 13 wounds, with the last stab piercing his eye. Trembling with shock, Tara was fortunate that a neighbor saw her and came to help with a towel for her injuries. The neighbor also called the police. John was still alive when paramedics arrived. They found he had a pulse. In John's car, authorities discovered duct tape, cable ties, kitchen knives, and a passport. This indicated he might have planned to abduct Tara and leave the city with her as a hostage. John Mayan was taken to the hospital but died 4 days later at age 57. His remains were cremated and no memorial service was held, as he was universally disliked by those who knew him. Deborah and her children were deeply traumatized by the entire incident. It took some time for Deborah to return to normal life, but she still struggles with guilt for bringing a criminal into their family. Now, Deborah has become very cautious. She carries a stun gun and pepper spray at all times for protection. She has stated that she would never meet someone online again, based on this experience. May 15, 2006 was 2 days before Aju Iroaga's 26th birthday, but he wasn't in any celebratory mood. He had returned early from a family trip to Nigeria, the birthplace of both his parents, to start a summer job with the A&M Reforestation Agency, which was based in Sudbury, Ontario. However, his actual worksite was far more remote. He was employed as a tree planter at a camp located 5 miles west of White River, Ontario, a small town. The planting sites, where he worked on planting jack pine and black spruce seedlings, were located over 40 miles further into the wilderness. The environment was cool, damp, and isolated, and the work was physically demanding. Having spent the previous summer doing the same job, Aju was well prepared for the tough conditions and the hard labor. A third-year engineering student at McMaster University, Aju took this job to fund his education, a responsibility he took very seriously. However, this year was not going as smoothly as his first. May 15th marked only Aju's second day of work for the season, and it began with a heated argument with his supervisor during the bus ride from the base camp to the remote worksite. After spending the morning planting seedlings, Aju found himself in another disagreement when the crew took a lunch break around noon. His supervisor criticized his work, telling him that he had done a poor job and would need to replant the entire area he had worked on that morning. Aju, who was very detail-oriented and had worked the previous summer with great care, felt insulted by the remark. So angry was he that he quit his job on the spot, demanding a ride back to base camp to collect his things and prepare to return to his home in Toronto. He was told that no one could give him a ride back to camp and that he would have to wait until 6 p.m. to ride the bus back with the rest of the crew when they finished work for the day. He was told to wait at the intersection of 2 remote gravel logging roads until he could travel back with the rest of the crew. He was seen waiting there by at least 10 other workers throughout the afternoon, the last time being at 3:45. At 4:0:5, someone passed the intersection, but Aju was no longer there. Sometime in those 20 minutes, Aju vanished. He has not been seen since. There were no clues of any sort left at the intersection suggesting what may have become of Aju. After Aju's crew headed back to camp without him at 6 p.m., supervisors from A&M Reforestation drove up and down the logging roads around where he was last seen, honking their horns and calling his name. At 9 p.m., the Ontario Provincial Police out of Waite River were called. They did not arrive to the base camp until 11 p.m., when it was too dark for them to search the woods. They therefore took a few notes and called the emergency response team to prepare for a search in the morning. 2 A&M supervisors spent the night in a truck near the intersection where Aju had last been seen. The search the next day involved 2 police helicopters, 1 volunteer helicopter, 18 members of the emergency response team, 7 volunteers from the city of Sault Ste. Marie, and 3 Ontario Provincial Police K-9 units, also from Sault Ste. Marie. The search ran until early in the evening, but found no evidence of Aju or any leads to follow. With the day's search being unsuccessful, the decision was made to contact Aju's family. At 2 a.m. on May 17th, Aju's 26th birthday, Aju's parents received a phone call telling them that their youngest son was missing. Aju's father, Nawab, made it to the camp on May 19th, and Aju's brother was able to join him the following day. At the base camp, they were given Aju's possessions. These included basic items like the clothing he had brought with him for the summer, but also items that seemingly eliminated any hope that Aju had somehow made it back to camp and then headed home. And Aju's camp locker had been his wallet, his driver's license, his phone card, his social insurance card, and both his Canadian and Nigerian passports. The search for Aju in the wilderness went on for a week but was called off on May 22nd, having found absolutely nothing. Within a few weeks of Aju missing, his case was considered open but inactive by the Ontario Provincial Police. Since no sign of Aju or a potential path he may have taken was found in the woods, it has been the belief of his family that he was somehow taken out of the area. This could have occurred in several different scenarios. In some of these scenarios, Aju left the area willingly and in some he did not. Aju was in excellent physical shape and was a trained distance runner, known to sprint along 18 miles of the logging roads each morning before being sent out to plant trees. It would not necessarily be impossible for him to have traveled on foot the 40 miles along the access road that would take him to the Trans-Canada Highway to try to hitchhike, either back to camp or to some other destination of his choosing. That being said, if he planned to do that, why did he wait 4 hours to start the journey? By that time, waiting for the bus directly back to the base camp, where he would have had to go to retrieve his documents, would have been much quicker. It was also beginning to get dark at 4 o'clock, making the foot journey much more dangerous than it would have been if he had left midday. Even assuming that Aju did get impatient and tried to make it out of the woods on his own, he either got lost on the way, met with foul play at the hands of someone who gave him a ride, or successfully got out of the remote area and went off to start a new life in secret. The first scenario seems unlikely given the complete lack of evidence and the extensive search. The second is possible, but as of now has no supporting evidence, and the third has its own set of problems. Aju was very close with his family and will not have put them through the heartache of not knowing where he was willingly. While this is a sentiment often expressed when a person goes missing, it is a sentiment and hard to evaluate or prove objectively. In Aju's case, however, there are solid facts that discredit this theory. Aju did have a desire to dramatically change his living situation. Aju had expressed interest in returning to Nigeria because of the calming effect being in the village of his father's birth had on his mental health. He was also highly respected in the village. The village did not have running water, and during the times Aju spent there, he would leave early in the mornings with a wheelbarrow to collect water in a nearby stream for the elderly and infirm. Since Aju's dream of starting over was so specific, it is easier to evaluate if he decided to abandon his current life willingly. If Aju decided to make his dream a reality after quitting his job, he would have needed to go back to the camp to get his passports in order to travel internationally. Since he could not hitchhike or walk to Africa, he would also have needed money for a plane ticket, but his bank accounts were not touched after he went missing. Given that Aju also had extended family back in Nigeria and his immediate family traveled there regularly, he would have been discovered even if he did somehow covertly make it back to his father's village. The Orowaga family's dual ties to both Nigeria and Canada began in 1968 when Aju's father, Nawab, came to Canada from Nigeria to study at the University of Waterloo. His plan was to bring his wife and infant daughter there after he was settled. But a civil war in Nigeria escalated soon after he arrived in Canada and threatened his dreams of reuniting with them. After more than a year of not being able to contact his family, Nawab was finally able to bring them to Canada. The Iroquois then had 4 more children, with Aju being the youngest, and Nawab ultimately became a college professor. The family divided their time between Canada and Nigeria. These stretches in each country could span several years. Aju attended primary school in Nigeria and struggled to adapt when the family returned to Canada. He was taunted in his junior high school outside of Toronto for his accent and his slender build, and he told his parents he wanted to return to Nigeria. The stress ultimately impacted his behavior. At first he became withdrawn, but then he developed a temper. He got into a violent altercation with a classmate over a basketball while he was in high school. Following this incident, Audrey redirected all his energy into excelling academically. This plan worked both because it contained his temper and also because it got him offer of admission to multiple universities. His temper did get out of control again in his second year at McMaster when he got into a fight with another student in his dorm after a disagreement. Aju ended up spending a month in prison. Again, he took this was also when he began running more seriously, as well as composing music, to give himself new outlets for his emotions and energy. Aju's supervisor managed to get through all these defenses Aju had built up and bring out some of his temper. However, despite the fact that Aju got into these arguments the day he disappeared, his behavior does seem to show that his anger management skills were improving. While quitting his job may seem rash, it can also be argued that it was a decision for Aju to make. If he and his supervisor were going to continue to argue all summer, it may have been best for Aju to remove himself from the situation before tension could build to the point where he would lash out. Furthermore, Aju seemed calm according to those who saw him standing at the intersection for those 4 hours just prior to his disappearance. He even reportedly waved or gave a thumbs up to one of his supervisors during this time he was waiting, indicating that his mood had calmed. However, this analysis is based on what the company says happened the day Aju disappeared based on notes from the company's supervisors. All of the information we have about the day Aju disappeared is potentially suspect. It is possible that the argument escalated at the worksite or was rekindled several hours later as Aju was waiting by the road and resulted in Aju meeting with foul play. The company's account perhaps should be looked at with some skepticism when viewed through the context of when and how it was recorded, and when and how the investigation into Aju's disappearance was handled as a whole. The only reason for any sort of investigation into Aju's disappearance after May of 2006 was the dedicated efforts of the Iroquois family and the private investigators they hired in June 2006. The position of the Ontario Provincial Police from the beginning was that Aju had wandered off and lost in the woods, and they did not perform any of the basic investigative tasks normally performed in a missing persons case, where any number of scenarios could have resulted in the disappearance of the individual. There were no photos taken at the worksite, the site was not searched, the names of the other members of Aju's crew were not so much as recorded, and the witnesses in the case were not interviewed. The supervisor Aju had gotten into the fights with on the day he disappeared was not even interviewed by police until October 2007, almost a year and a half after Aju vanished. In this interview, she claimed to have not argued with Aju at all on the day he vanished. This was a striking reversal of the previous narrative of May 15, 2006, but when the police accept this fact, the Ontario Provincial Police have resisted the attempts of the Orogas to have the case reactivated, stating that they will not move forward with the case unless new information is discovered indicating that a crime was committed in it. Almost all of that potential evidence was lost the day Aju disappeared, when they chose not to try to collect it. In 2008, the Oroga family publicly appealed to the provincial government of Ontario to open a coroner's inquest into Aju's case and for a new search in an extended area. They believe the initial search was not carried out in the correct area, which is why no sign of their son was found. They also called for the Ministry of Labor to investigate the safety practices of the reforestation firms that recruited university students. These efforts did not result in any advancement in Aju's case. While Aju's parents believe that their son is no longer alive, they struggle with the lack of answers about what happened to him. They hope to one day be able to provide their youngest child with a proper burial. Jamie Hahn was born on October 25, 1983. Growing up in Orangeburg, South Carolina, she lived with her two brothers and sister, Brett, Justin, and Ashley. Despite their parents' divorce and remarriage, Jamie remained a cheerful child. She attended a small yet renowned private prep school celebrated for its educational excellence. In junior high, Jamie visited the University of North Carolina with her classmates. She instantly fell in love with the campus and aspired to attend. Even as a student, she aimed to impact others' lives by joining the board of the Center of Hope to support troubled teens. Later on, Jamie engaged in various political campaigns. One notable campaign was Senator John Edwards' 2008 presidential run, a competitor to Obama. During this campaign, Jamie emerged as a prominent figure in North Carolina's Democratic Party. During one campaign, she met Nation and formed a deep professional relationship with him that later evolved from platonic to romantic. For months after their first romantic moment, they announced their engagement and married on April 18, 2009. Their intense love was anchored in a deep friendship. Jamie and Nation thrived in their respective careers. Jamie ran her own political fundraising consulting firm, while Nation was a well-known online strategist, aiding politicians and nonprofits with their campaigns. Described by friends and acquaintances as exceptionally kind, tender, and generous, the couple was well regarded. They took their marriage vows seriously and actively participated in projects like the Coalition to Protect Young Families in North Carolina. Although they were childless at that time, Jamie and Nation planned on starting a family soon. They both enjoyed vibrant social lives. Jamie was known among her friends and family as a compassionate individual who had the ability to spread happiness wherever she went. Her talent and enthusiasm for politics led many to foresee a promising future for her. However, unexpectedly, their seemingly perfect world suddenly fell apart on April 22, 2013. Around 5:20 p.m., Jamie frantically ran from her house and sprinted a few dozen meters before collapsing unconscious in a neighbor's yard. Her body was drenched in blood. Onlookers on the street were shocked by the scene and shouted for someone to call 911. A neighbor, who saw the turmoil unfolding in his yard, immediately phoned emergency services. Through Jameen's disoriented words, he understood that someone named John, who seemed to still be inside her house, had assaulted her with a knife. He quickly applied a towel to the numerous wounds on her abdomen and urgently summoned an ambulance and the police. Arriving patrol officers traced the blood from the neighbor's yard back to the Hahn residence. Encircling the house, they commanded the individual inside to exit with hands raised. Moments later, a disheveled bald man emerged on the porch. The officers noted he bore wrist injuries and a stab wound in his abdomen. Due to his injuries, this unidentified man was transported to the hospital in an ambulance, escorted by a police officer. En route to the hospital, the wounded man grew distressed and tearful, expressing regret that this hadn't occurred sooner, and repeatedly murmuring a desire to die. Following his medical treatment, the police endeavored to ascertain his identity, reasons for being in the Hahn residence, and circumstances leading to this tragic event. They soon discovered he was 31-year-old Jonathan Wayne Brill, a close friend of Nation and a guest in their home. Jameen also knew John well. She had employed him as an accountant in her political consulting firm after he relocated to North Carolina. The couple had generously offered him accommodation in their home until he could find his own place. Nation and John hailed from the same hometown and first crossed paths in 2000 during a church trip. Despite a 4-year age gap, they quickly struck up a friendship. As it often happens with childhood friends, they drifted apart when one went off to college, but rekindled their bond post-graduation. They became virtually inseparable. Jonathan even had the honor of being the best man at Nation and Jameen's wedding. In April 2009, the trio was akin to the Three Musketeers, following the ethos of one for all and all for one. They shared vacations, regular Monday dinners, and celebrated holidays together. To some neighbors, Jonathan seemed almost like an extension of the Han family, given how much time he spent at their home. This deep, seemingly unbreakable bond makes the violent incident that left all three with stab wounds in their own home all the more perplexing and tragic. Every Monday, Jamie and Nation would host their mutual friend Jonathan for dinner. On that particular day, Broyhill arrived earlier than usual, with the intention of discussing recent campaign details with Jamie. The friends were deeply concerned about John's well-being, as he had confided in them about his diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, a notably aggressive and often terminal disease. The Hans, in their caring nature, accompanied Jonathan to his medical appointments and were consistently present, offering every possible support in his arduous battle for life. There was an instance when Jamie, overwhelmed with emotion, asked Nation if they should consider having a child soon so that their future offspring might have the chance to know Jonathan. Such was their affection and regard for their friend. They wished even their yet-to-be-born child could have the opportunity to bond with him. The recent diagnosis of cancer was a harsh blow, but it wasn't the first health challenge Brill had encountered. Over the years, John had experienced multiple hospitalizations. He had once revealed to Nation that he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis during a gallbladder operation. Consequently, the Hans invited Jonathan to live with them temporarily, offering care and support until his health improved. On that fateful Monday, Jamie and Jonathan were already engaged in work-related discussions in the kitchen when Nation arrived home and headed upstairs to change. Nation was startled by Jamie's screams calling out his and then John's name. Assuming that Brill may have fallen ill given his medical condition, Nation hurried downstairs midway. He was met with Jameen's terror-stricken voice, crying out that someone was trying to stab her. Rushing into the kitchen, Nation was confronted with the horrifying sight of his wife on the floor, bleeding profusely. John stood over her, wielding a large kitchen knife. As Brill and started advancing towards Nation, knife raised threateningly. Nation froze in disbelief. How could such a nightmare unfold in mere minutes? In a desperate act of self-defense, Nation grabbed the knife blade with one hand while striking John in the face with his other hand. Amidst this chaos, he frantically urged Jermaine to run for safety. Attempting to subdue a man who until moments ago was his closest friend seemed almost unreal. Despite her grave injuries, Jermaine miraculously managed to rise from the floor and flee through the side door of their home. Once she was out, Nation, overcoming shock and tumult, pushed Jonathan aside and hurried after his wife. Outside, Jermaine desperately made her way to the nearest neighbor's house for help. Unfortunately, no one responded to her urgent knocking. Summoning her remaining strength, she attempted to reach the next house but collapsed unconscious in their yard due to her overwhelming injuries. Alerted by the commotion and drawn by the screams, passers-by quickly came to her assistance, while a neighbor called for an ambulance and the police. Meanwhile, Nation, panicked, searched frantically for Jermaine. Following the trail of blood led him to discover her in a neighbor's yard. She was conscious, but in agony, clutching her side. Kneeling beside her, he took her hand and tried comforting her with promises of recovery and future anniversaries and vacations by the sea, though tears streamed down his face. As he spoke, clutching Jermaine's hand, Nation was overwhelmed by thoughts of a life without her and unable to fathom how their peaceful life had taken such a sudden turn. As they awaited help, a neighbor swiftly brought a towel to press against Jermaine's bleeding abdomen. Unfortunately, the towel was quickly soaked with blood. Another compassionate neighbor elevated Jermaine's legs onto a bag of leaves, trying to give some comfort. The ambulance was on its way, but to the onlookers the wait felt endless. Even though it was only a few minutes, Jermaine's breathing grew labored, a clear sign of her critical state. When the paramedics arrived, they promptly administered life-saving measures. Nation, having suffered severe cuts to his hand while wrestling with the knife, also desperately needed medical attention. Both he and Jermaine were rushed to the hospital. During transport, Jermaine lost consciousness and upon arrival was taken immediately for emergency surgery. Meanwhile, Nation, overwhelmed with worry for his wife and oblivious to his own pain, received stitches. He was in such shock that he repeatedly tried to enter the ICU, desperate for any updates about Jamine, but was denied access. Seated anxiously on a hospital bed, Nation was tormented by thoughts of Jamine's condition. Over a dozen stab wounds, a severed artery, and severe liver damage. His only solace during those excruciating moments was hoping and praying for her survival. By some miracle, Germaine did survive the surgery initially, but tragically, this hope was short-lived. She never regained consciousness. 2 days after this harrowing ordeal, Germaine succumbed to her injuries. The autopsy revealed a grim reality. She had sustained 24 stab wounds across various parts of her body, including her face, neck, back, hands, and forearms. However, the most lethal injuries were inflicted on her abdomen and chest, resulting in catastrophic damage to her lungs and liver. Meanwhile, Jonathan Brill had inflicted wounds upon himself and was hospitalized for 8 days to recover from his self-inflicted injuries. On Tuesday, April 30th, 2013, still needing medical attention with bandages on both wrists, Brill was transported on a stretcher to the magistrate's office in Wake County. The individual was formally charged with first-degree murder in the case Jamine Han and assault with a deadly weapon on Nation Han. Due to the severity of the charges, he was held without bail and at Central Prison in Raleigh. This facility was specifically chosen because it housed a hospital wing, ensuring that Bree Hill would continue to receive the necessary medical treatment while in custody for his crimes. The tragic and sudden loss of Jamine profoundly impacted many, leaving a lingering question. Why would someone she considered a best friend commit such a horrific act, robbing her of her future? In the wake of the tragedy, speculation swirled within the community about a substantial amount of money that had gone missing during the election campaign, managed by Germaine's team. Jonathan Brill, who had served as the accountant, officially ceased working for the company at the end of 2012. Despite this, he remained responsible for providing Jamine with financial details and assisting in the preparation of financial reports. It was suspected that Jamine might have discovered the missing funds, which totaled over $50,000, and confronted Jonathan about this discrepancy. This confrontation could have triggered his violent outburst. On April 22, 2013, Jamine had invited Jonathan over for their regular Monday dinner and intended to discuss the company's financial issues. The exact sequence of events during Nation's brief absence remains unclear. However, it is widely believed that Jamine might have challenged Jonathan regarding the missing funds during this time. As time passed, Nation's physical wounds began to heal, but emotional and psychological scars remained deep and unhealing. 6 months following this devastating event, Jamine's family and Nation, her grieving husband, scattered her ashes near Pulaski Memorial Baptist Church. This place was significant because Jamine had dedicated her time and efforts as a volunteer there. In a poignant twist of fate, just a week before the tragedy, the Hans had requested the church's pastor to pray for Jonathan, who they believed was battling cancer. Did they know that soon, it would be they who needed the prayers of their community in the wake of such an unimaginable loss? The Nation had to grapple with the truth that an individual he had known from childhood, whom he saw as his dearest friend, had completely shattered his life, and even more heartbreakingly, claimed the life of the woman he adored more than anything in the world. According to Nation, Jamine was his anchor, his backbone, and his soulmate. He couldn't fathom how the sun could continue to glow without her. The trial of Brill commenced on March 4, 2015. The district attorney informed the jury that Jonathan, serving as Jenny's financial manager, had written 39 checks to himself, misappropriating around $50,000, the identical sum missing from the account. To rationalize his deeds, Brill claimed various health issues, including brain impairment from multiple sclerosis, memory deficits, a gallbladder operation, and pancreatic cancer. Compassionate Jamie refrained from confronting John about such a sensitive matter during his challenging times. She tactfully sidestepped the issue, hoping Brill would identify and rectify the mistake. All seemed normal until she got a call from a debt collector. Then the district attorney unveiled a startling truth. The preceding year, the defendant's first hospitalization occurred when he was admitted following an episode at Hans's residence. Prior to that, Jonathan hadn't sought any medical treatment, as his health records confirmed. All along he had deceived Jamie and Nation about his health conditions. No gallbladder operation, no multiple sclerosis, and no cancer, but merely a manifest mental disorder and something dreadful. Within the search history, revealed that the man had been seeking information on pancreatic cancer and specialists in this particular field, evidently to lend credibility to his falsehoods. He also looked up cruises that could be taken without a passport. John had arranged a one-way journey to Las Vegas for April 23rd, but canceled it on the 22nd, merely 2 hours before assaulting Jamie with a knife. Jonathan admitted to the authorities that he had indeed misappropriated the campaign funds and fabricated all his medical conditions. When the Hans escorted him to medical appointments, waiting in the car as devoted, caring friends, he merely roamed the hospital halls. In recent times, Jonathan grappled with depression and suicidal inclinations. He confessed to being tormented by voices urging him to harm others. He purchased the knife for himself, supposedly planning to use it in Vegas to end his life. Yet, he believed Jamine would confront him about the financial irregularities. When she did, he began to inflict wounds on himself. Jamine attempted to intervene, but at that point, he was so deranged and furious that he started assaulting his friend impulsively. Jonathan recalled attacking Jamie, yet parts of this episode were wiped from his memory. His lawyer and Jonathan himself realized that fully dismissing the charges was unfeasible due to the overwhelming evidence of his guilt. Still, they aimed to argue for temporary insanity to lessen the sentence. Before the jury retired to deliberate, Nation Han was allowed to speak. With a voice filled with sorrow, he expressed, "We lock our doors at night to block out the world's evil, but it's chilling to think what occurs when evil holds the key." He addressed these words to his former best friend. On March 19, 2015, the jury announced their decision. They ruled Jonathan Brill guilty of first-degree murder of Jamie Han and the attempted murder of Nation Han. The judge issued a life sentence without parole. Germaine's intentions were utterly pure, and her death was so senseless that even Jonathan later acknowledged in an interview that if he had been honest with the Hans, she would have forgiven him. Suddenly, their closest friend became their worst fear. This story defies any rational explanation. Max received an urgent call from his close friend, Jonathan Hoffman, on May 18, 2012, at 5 p.m. Both were seniors at Farmington Central High School in the affluent West Bloomfield area near Detroit, Michigan. Their friendship began in 9th grade during an English class and was sparked by a mutual appreciation for Tupac, one of the most influential figures in American hip-hop. Jonathan confided in Max that he had recently failed a court-mandated drug screening. He had been on probation since authorities found a prohibited synthetic substance in his vehicle 2 months earlier. Jonathan expressed concern over his grandmother Sandra's intense anger towards him. At 17 years old, Jonathan had been living in his grandparents' apartment for 9 months following his parents' divorce and their relocation to Arizona. Initially, Jonathan went with his parents to Arizona. However, shortly after their arrival, the family was dealt a severe blow when his younger sister Jessica was diagnosed with a benign brain tumor. This necessitated multiple surgeries and ongoing medical care. Adapting to a new school while coping with his sister's health issues left Jonathan feeling unhappy and despondent. Jonathan was overjoyed when his grandmother Sandra suggested he return to West Bloomfield and stay with her until he completed high school. The prospect of reuniting with friends and familiar surroundings excited him. Nevertheless, not everyone approved of the arrangement between Jonathan and his grandmother. Jonathan's father Michael, a prominent attorney for many years, had observed some disconcerting traits in Sandra's personality. 74-year-old Sandra Lane, a retired educator and mother of 5, could be exacting and stern. While she cherished her grandson deeply, along with her 85-year-old husband Fred, the situation presented its challenges given the teenager's yearning to reconnect with friends during what should have been a stable final year at Farmington Central High School. Jonathan's father eventually conceded, allowing him to thrive once again at Farmington High School. There, he was recognized as the class clown, an exceptionally intelligent student, and a tech whiz. He had secured a full scholarship to Eastern Michigan University. His peers saw him as a spirited, cheerful, and optimistic individual. That's why Jonathan's call to Max caused such alarm. He didn't sound like himself. His voice carried not only concern, but also palpable fear. The friends decided to meet up later that same day, and Jonathan promised he'd text within the next 30 minutes to confirm the time. Max waited for the message, but 40 minutes passed with no word from his friend. Growing impatient, Max decided to call Jonathan directly. The phone rang, and rang without any response. Unbeknownst to him at the time, Jonathan would never be able to reply again. Just before this incident, around 5:20 p.m., the West Bloomfield Township Police Department received an emergency call from Sandra Lane's residence, Jonathan's grandmother's home. The young caller informed the dispatcher he had been shot and struggled for breath over those 3 minutes. He begged for help, stating that he was on the brink of death. The assailant had already fled the scene without seeking aid. The subsequent events were even more horrific. The emergency dispatcher listened as Jonathan frantically called out for help before several gunshots rang out again. His screams of pain were followed by faint words that he was dying. Then came a short silence before a woman's scream echoed through the line, leading to an eerie quietude. By about 5:30 p.m., West Bloomfield police arrived at Sandra Lane's condo in the serene Maple Point gated community, a neighborhood known for its low crime rate and predominantly inhabited by retirees. A resident had reported hearing gunshots in this typically peaceful area. As officers disembarked from their vehicle onto the neatly kept lawn, they headed into what would become one of their most chilling calls yet. Another gunshot reverberated from within the residence. Before the officers could make their way inside, a woman appeared at the front door, the officer's instructions to disarm herself. She was a small elderly woman with fading red hair, her clothes spattered with blood. With her hands raised in surrender, she informed the officers that she had just taken her grandson's life. This revelation stunned the officers, yet it paled in comparison to what awaited them inside. As they entered the condo, the officers were confronted with a ghastly scene. Blood and smudges were present in nearly every room. Bullet impacts marred both walls and furnishings, and empty shell casings littered the ground. Near the entryway lay a discarded 9mm Glock 17 semi-automatic handgun. Subsequent forensic analysis would uncover additional magazines for the firearm, hidden within the residence. On the upper floor, police found 17-year-old Jonathan Hoffman sprawled face down in a pool of blood. He suffered from multiple gunshot wounds across his chest, arms, back, and stomach, indicating that many shots were fired at close quarters. Emergency medical personnel swiftly transported him to Botsford Hospital, clinging to hope they could save him. Sadly, by 6 p.m., Jonathan succumbed to his injuries. Sandra was taken to the closest medical facility as a precautionary measure. Medical professionals conducted various examinations to confirm her well-being. The next day, Sandra Lane faced charges for her grandson's homicide and was detained without bail while awaiting trial for either first or second-degree murder. Her guilt left to be determined by a jury. Throughout this ordeal, she maintained her innocence. News of this incident plunged Jonathan's family, friends, and neighbors into deep sorrow and shock. They all pondered what could have driven Sandra to turn a firearm on her dearly loved grandson. The news of this tragic event spread rapidly through the tranquil neighborhood, with media outlets speculating on various theories. Whispers suggested that Jonathan had failed a drug screening test. Journalists highlighted a narrative involving two neglectful parents who left their substance-dependent teenage son in the care of elderly grandparents. Based on the grandmother's testimony, it was revealed that at the time Jonathan's passing, he had an illegal synthetic drug in his system, which had previously caused him complications. His death shortly after another sensational incident involving hallucinogen consumption. Just 2 weeks prior, another youth under the influence of drugs assaulted his family with a baseball bat, resulting in a fatal event. Takia Cipriana and his accomplice consumed a prohibited substance before attacking their parents. Sandra Lane's attorney argued that she had legitimate concerns for her safety due to managing a young man on probation who was difficult to restrain. It was widely reported that this particular drug could induce aggression in users. If an incident similar to Taquia's had occurred at Sandra's residence, could her actions against Jonathan be justified as self-defense? This was the reasoning Sandra provided to both the police and jury. She asserted that since Jonathan's return to West Bloomfield, he had become unruly and exhibited aggressive behavior. Sandra claimed that he rarely left the house and mingled with teenagers addicted to dangerous synthetic drugs. Sandra also stated that Jonathan's parents did not inform her about his addiction before his arrival and showed little concern for his activities during his stay. Michael, Jonathan's father, was portrayed as having abandoned him. Jonathan frequently had fits of rage, destroying objects and damaging furniture in his room. When upset or during disputes, he would lash out, even breaking his own possessions like his computer monitor and phone. Authorities confirmed that Jonathan had a history with illegal substances. On March 17, 2011, he was apprehended and penalized for possessing hallucinogenic drugs. Subsequently, in court, he received a 93-day deferred sentence, along with a year of probation and the requirement for random drug screenings related to these substances. Jonathan's acquaintances shared with law enforcement their concerns regarding his drug habit and their efforts to redirect him away from it. Sandra exerted considerable effort to assist Jonathan in reforming his ways, focusing on his academic performance and adhering to her guidelines. Nevertheless, he resisted these attempts, displaying defiance, erratic behavior, and occasional aggression. Fred confirmed that from the moment Jonathan arrived, there were continuous and intense disputes between him and Sandra. She even contacted the police multiple times due to Jonathan becoming utterly unmanageable. She sought assistance from the school as well, but all efforts proved futile. Sandra recounted an incident where Jonathan, under the influence of drugs, lost complete control. This situation necessitated hospital staff to restrain him to a gurney. The elderly woman implored his parents for help. However, his father remained indifferent and did not return to Michigan. Gradually, Sandra began fearing for her safety. She confided in her husband about her concerns regarding their grandson and his disreputable associates. In a bid for self-protection and to safeguard her elderly husband, feeling cornered with no other option, Sandra acquired a Glock 17 pistol for defense in case Jonathan or his friends became aggressive. On the critical morning of May 18, 2012, Lane took Jonathan for a drug test that returned positive for illicit substances. Jonathan was instructed to undergo another test later that day. Upon receiving another positive result, he became furious while in his grandmother's vehicle. He resorted to swearing violently, kicking the dashboard, and at one point, seizing the steering wheel, compelling Sandra to halt the car multiple times. Jonathan even attempted to snatch the car keys at one juncture. Upon their return home, the confrontation intensified. Apprehensive that he might be incarcerated, Jonathan decided to flee immediately to Arizona. He demanded $2,000 and the car keys from his grandmother. She complied with neither request. When Grandpa Fred took the dog for a walk, Sandra felt overwhelmingly frightened and attempted to pacify the teenager to no avail. She retreated to her bedroom and retrieved the loaded pistol, hoping it would compel her grandson to heed her words, or at least acknowledge her presence. Upon returning upstairs to Jonathan's bedroom and finding him in the bathroom, instead of heeding her, the boy hurled insults, kicked her in the abdomen, and struck her on the head. A struggle ensued during which Sandra discharged the firearm. She then fled to the basement in a state of panic, seeking refuge. After a while, she ventured upstairs to check on him, only for her grandson to assault her once more, attempting to wrest the gun away. In the ensuing lull, she shot again in self-defense. This narrative paints a picture of elderly individuals trapped in a dire predicament that tragically culminated in Sandra shooting her beloved grandson out of genuine fear for her own life. However, questions remain as to whether Lane's account is entirely accurate. As the investigation deepened, a contrasting narrative began to surface, one that was still tragic but considerably more concerning. Initial claims by Sandra regarding Jonathan's alleged violent nature didn't align with the experiences of those who knew him personally. Contrary to portraying him as aggressive, interviews revealed that at school, Jonathan was known as humorous and peace-loving. He was always quick to diffuse conflicts with his humor and intelligence. Friends also testified that they hadn't observed any recent changes in his demeanor. Furthermore, Jonathan was described as having a very lean build, standing at just 1.67 meters tall and weighing merely 50 kilograms, hardly fitting the profile of a physically intimidating person. His stature was notably similar to his grandmother's. It appeared that instances of Jonathan's so-called rage were exclusively reported by Sandra, a claim now met with skepticism. Fred, Sandra's husband, acknowledged witnessing heated arguments between his wife and grandson. Despite being present at home almost all the time, there was never any physical violence. Sandra played a key role in overseeing Jonathan's education, establishing strict expectations, which the teenager had difficulty meeting. Fred even suggested sending Jonathan back to his parents in Arizona. However, Sandra rejected this proposal, contradicting her claim that the boy was unmanageable under her care. Jennifer, Sandra's daughter, told the police that during the 9 months, Jonathan stayed with his grandparents. He maintained daily communication with her and visited them monthly. Throughout this period, Sandra never reported any issues between her and Jonathan, nor did she express feeling overwhelmed by his presence. When Jennifer learned about Jonathan's legal troubles involving illicit substances, she discussed possible solutions with her mother. She considered either rehabilitation or sending him back to Arizona. Sandra convinced her that she could handle the situation independently. Reluctantly, Jennifer agreed to leave her son in her parents' war custody, a decision that would later prove tragically significant. Authorities were summoned to the Lane household on 2 occasions. The first call came in March 2012 when Jonathan himself dialed emergency services. He was distressed after consuming magic mushrooms and experiencing severe paranoia, fearing for his life. Upon arrival, police noted that he showed no aggression, but was terrified upon seeing them. He eagerly embraced one officer before being secured to a stretcher for his protection and transported to a medical facility. Just 4 days after this incident with magic mushrooms, Sandra Lane reached out to 911 again. She reported that her grandson was enraged and attempting to flee, while Jonathan informed the dispatcher that his grandmother was forcibly trying to confine him in her vehicle. When officers arrived, they encountered Jonathan vocally berating his grandmother. The law enforcement officials then proposed intervening with the irate youth. Sandra opted to handle the matter herself. This episode was recorded in the police files as a routine verbal dispute between a guardian and a child, which was settled amicably. However, for the detectives leading the investigation, this case increasingly seemed less about a rebellious teenager spiraling out of control and more about a woman enforcing her authority over a defiant child. The hearing on April 12th, regarding the possession of prohibited substances and subsequent probation, had evidently enraged Sandra. She believed she could discipline her grandson effectively. Up until that point, Sandra had been resolute in steering Jonathan onto the correct path. Yet, as graduation neared and her opportunities dwindled, this mission began to look like a failure. In that moment, Sandra faced many choices. She could have contacted her daughter or sent Jonathan for rehabilitation. Instead, she acquired a semi-automatic pistol and took several shooting lessons at a firing range. Determined to prevail in this conflict and assert control over her unruly teenage grandson at any cost, for days after Jonathan was placed on probation, Sandra Lane applied for a license to carry a firearm. On April 18th, she purchased a 9mm Glock, explaining to the store owner that she needed it for home protection. She chose a weapon intended for lethal force, along with ammunition containing expanding bullets, designed to inflict maximum damage. After buying the pistol, Sandra trained at the nearest shooting range until she felt proficient in handling it. She kept her newfound expertise hidden from her husband, who remained unaware of the gun's presence in their home. He was quite taken aback when he discovered how much his wife had managed to achieve covertly. On the fateful day of May 18, 2012, Sandra and Jonathan returned home at around 5 p.m. Sandra then requested her husband, Fred, to take their dog for a walk and insisted that he remain outside until she gave him permission to return. Their outdoor time extended for so long that both homeowner and dog grew weary. They ended up sitting together on the grass watching a basketball game. As Fred Wayne, the grandfather of the deceased high schooler, recounted during an interview when they heard police sirens, he failed to grasp the situation. Why did Sandra want Fred to leave them? It seemed less like the action of a woman fearing for her life, and more like someone with a plan, intent on carrying it out without interference or witnesses. If Jonathan was as agitated as described by his grandmother, it's unlikely Fred would have left them alone. However, more compelling evidence against Sandra was yet to come. At that same time, 5 p.m., Jonathan was talking with his friend Max about their evening plans. Max informed the police that Jonathan's tone wasn't angry or excited. Instead, he sounded frightened. He was worried about failing a drug test and anxious about his grandmother's reaction. Jonathan mentioned that Sandra was so furious, she threatened to send him back to Arizona. Sandra claimed her grandson violently assaulted her, striking her in the head and abdomen before she discharged the firearm. Medical personnel from the nearest hospital examined her immediately after the incident, but found no injuries or bruises. Ballistic evidence revealed Sandra fired the weapon more than 10 times throughout various locations in the house. 6 bullets struck Jonathan. 2 shots were aimed at his back, indicating he attempted to flee from Sandra. Another shot struck him in the abdomen while he was wounded and conversing with a 911 dispatcher. The police were convinced it was Sandra chasing Jonathan, not the other way around. The grandmother sought to punish her grandson for his perceived wrongdoing while he sought refuge. At some point, she descended to the basement to reload her pistol, likely when Jonathan ascended to his bedroom to call 911, and subsequently returned, shooting him at close range while he lay on the floor bleeding. The final conclusive blow against Sandra's claims of self-defense came from the toxicology report. According to the report, at the time of the shooting, Jonathan's bloodstream didn't contain any prohibited substances. Only a metabolite of a harmful drug was identified in his urine. The forensic examiner clarified that the residual traces discovered in the urine indicated that all substances had left his body and had no impact on Hoffman's behavior. In other words, Jonathan was entirely lucid when Sandra opened fire on him. Consequently, the jury dismissed the defendant's self-defense claim. On March 19, 2013, Sandra Lane was convicted of a serious crime against her grandson, Jonathan Hoffman. Prior to sentencing, the elderly woman expressed regret for her actions, pleading for understanding. She claimed that her intention had not been to take the teenager's life, but rather to help him resolve his issues together. Meanwhile, her daughter Jennifer urged for the harshest punishment for her mother. She asserted that Sandra Lane was utterly malevolent and would undoubtedly repeat her actions if given the opportunity. Jennifer depicted her mother as a monstrous and obsessed individual, fixated on academic achievement. She firmly believed that everything Lane had stated in her statement was falsehoods. She concluded by stating that her son now resided in heaven, a place where Sandra would never have access. Lane received a minimum sentence of 20 years in addition to a mandatory 2-year term for utilizing a weapon in the commission of manslaughter. Her lawyer had pleaded on her behalf, citing concerns about her potential survival during an extended prison confinement. Jonathan's funeral occurred on May 22, 2012, with approximately 700 people who had known and cherished the young man in attendance. They fondly recalled moments spent with him and cherished him as a cheerful individual who never failed to bring laughter to those around him. As a grandson, Jonathan fell short of his grandmother's expectations, ultimately leading her to conclude that he did not belong in this world. Dr. Cheryl Pearson was a skilled pediatrician who had pursued a medical career after completing an undergraduate degree in chemical engineering. The youngest of 3 siblings, she shared a close bond with her family. On the evening of Friday, January 4, 2002, 37-year-old Dr. Pearson attended a Memphis Grizzlies basketball game at the Pyramid in downtown Memphis. A season ticket holder for the NBA team, she went to the game alone. While still at the Pyramid, Dr. Pearson spoke on the phone with several family members. Around 10:30 p.m., She drove from the pyramid to her home on Daybreak Drive in Bartlett, Tennessee. 2 of her friends came over after she arrived, and according to them, Dr. Pearson appeared to be in good spirits, looking forward to spending the next day with her sister Lorinda's children while Lorinda was at work. Her friends left her home around 1 a.m. on January 5th. When Lorinda arrived that morning to drop off her children, she found that Dr. Pearson was not at home and her car was missing. Immediately concerned, Lorinda feared her sister might be experiencing a medical emergency. Dr. Pearson suffered from severe type 1 diabetes, and Lorinda worried that her sister's blood sugar had become dangerously out of control, possibly causing her to drive off in a disoriented state and crash her car. All of Dr. Pearson's medications and supplies for managing her condition were left behind at home, as was her pager, which she needed for her on-call duties. Alarmed, Lorinda called the police. 2 days later, on January 7th, Dr. Pearson's blue 2001 Audi was found parked in the Quail Ridge apartment complex, which was on the other side of the golf course Dr. Pearson's street bordered. Inside the car, police found the ticket stub from the Grizzlies game, the keys to the car, and a bank envelope with $140 in $20 bills. In the trunk of the car was another set of keys and Dr. Pearson's medical bag. The most telling detail from the examination of the car was the complete absence of fingerprints found inside of it. Since not even Dr. Pearson's prints were found inside the car, police inferred that the car had been wiped down to destroy fingerprint evidence, which implied that foul play was involved in the doctor's disappearance. The only connection Dr. Pearson had to the criminal world was her brother-in-law, Chuck Hillbreath, who was facing bank robbery charges at the time of Dr. Pearson's disappearance. Chuck was married to Dr. Pearson's sister, Lorinda, and was the father of the children Dr. Pearson had been planning to spend January 5th with. Chuck and Lorinda were having financial problems, which raised concerns that Dr. Pearson's $150,000 life insurance policy may have been a motive for Chuck to harm her. Lorinda was the beneficiary of the policy with the money intended to provide for her children. Chuck was thoroughly investigated and interviewed multiple times by the Bartlett police. He provided an alibi for the night his sister-in-law vanished, which was picked apart by police, but ultimately accepted. Furthermore, since Dr. Pearson's body was not found, she was not immediately declared dead, so the life insurance policy was not paid out. If Dr. Pearson had been killed for insurance money, her body was hidden too well for the plan to actually succeed. Police examined Dr. Pearson's phone records and found that someone had called her home at 1:58 a.m. Reports from around the time Dr. Pearson went missing say that this call was only 5 seconds long. But in 2016, the police reported that it was in fact just under 2 minutes long. The call was traced to a payphone at a Citgo gas station not far from Daybreak Drive. The payphone had been wiped off fingerprints and there were no surveillance cameras covering the area. The caller has never been identified. Since there were no signs of a struggle or forced entry at Dr. Pearson's home, it appears that she was somehow convinced to leave her home in a hurry rather than being abducted from inside her home. Unfortunately, when Dr. Pearson's mother arrived at her home after learning her daughter was missing, she cleaned up around the house, potentially inadvertently destroying evidence in the case. Dr. Pearson was legally declared dead in 2009, the same year her father, Leon, passed away. 60-year-old Bill Lang lived in Binger, Oklahoma and worked as a ranch hand in nearby Hinton. Known as Wild Bill to his friends, his family acknowledges that some may have seen him as a little rough around the edges. However, his tough exterior covered a kind heart and dedication to his family. On March 3, 2016, Bill went to a convenience store in Binger just after 7 a.m. for his daily cup of coffee. Surveillance cameras at the convenience store captured the last known images of Bill. Bill then went to work. Around 8:30, after he arrived there, his daughter, Savannah Morris, called him to remind him that she would be running some errands for him that day and made plans to see him that evening. Later in the day, Bill visited an area tire shop to order tires for his vehicle. He arranged to pick up the tires on the following Monday. A witness reported seeing Bill at a worksite on I-40 near Methodist Road that afternoon. When Savannah tried calling her father that afternoon, he did not answer the phone. The following day, March 4th, Bill's Chevy S10 Blazer was seen along the eastbound side of I-40 near the Calumet exit by one of Savannah's friends. The friend called Savannah, who drove out to the vehicle to confirm that it was her father's. The vehicle was unlocked and contained tools Bill needed for work, as well as his keys, his cigarettes, and his eyeglasses. Concerned that the vehicle was left unlocked along the highway with all of these items inside, particularly the eyeglasses, Savannah reported her father missing. Despite numerous interviews and searches, have become of Bill is connected with his charitable nature. Just a few nights before his disappearance, Bill had stopped along the highway to pick up a man who had been in a car accident. He gave the injured man a ride to the hospital. According to Savannah Morris, Bill was quick to help out others in need. It is therefore possible that he may have stopped to help the wrong person and met with foul play at their hands. Bill's daughter Savannah, while she acknowledges that her father may have met with foul play, said at a press conference in January 2019 that she is refusing to allow her father's case to go cold. The Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation is offering a $5,000 reward for information in Bill's case, and his family is offering an additional $25,100 reward for information that locates Bill. Savannah and her family were invited to participate in an art therapy program, during which they worked with an artist to create a piece of art to honor Bill. The finished product, a replica of Bill's beloved Harley-Davidson, is currently spending 6 months on display at the Oklahoma History Center, along with Bill's picture and information about his case. Henrietta Milock grew up in a small Inuit community in the small coastal town of Nain, Newfoundland and Labrador. After having her first son, Chesley, she decided to continue her education so as to provide him with a better life. She left Chesley with family so that she could move to St. John's and study at the Memorial University of Newfoundland. She hoped to one day become a nurse. After moving to St. John's and beginning school, she took up 2 jobs, working as an Inuit translator and as a housekeeper, to support herself. She also became pregnant with her second child, Byron, who was born in June of 1982. Henrietta struggled with alcohol, and Byron was therefore removed from her care and placed into a foster home when he was 2 months old. Around 9 a.m. on December 10, 1982, 25-year-old Henrietta left the boarding house where she was staying. On her way out, she told her landlord that she planned to spend the day visiting family in McKenson's. As this was the town where her son's foster home was, she presumably meant that she was going to see Byron. Henrietta would regularly hitchhike out to McKenson's to visit him. It is unknown how Henrietta actually spent her day, however, as that night she had still not left for McKenson's. She visited her best friend, Mary Pia Brenniwen, and asked her to go out to the Key Club, a bar on the west side of Water Street in St. John's, with her. Mary Pia declined the invitation, and Henrietta went to the bar alone. Witnesses there saw 2 men trying to forcibly remove Henrietta from the bar. No one actually saw them get her outside, however. Henrietta called Marie Pia from a pay phone around 1 a.m., but Mary Pia's landlord, who answered the call, told Henrietta that Mary Pia was asleep and she didn't want to wake her. When the landlord told Mary Pia about the call in the morning, she said that Henrietta had sounded drunk and upset. The bartender who was working that night, who knew Henrietta because she was a regular at the bar, stepped into the back room at one point sometime after that call. When she came back, Henrietta was gone and her purse was on the floor. The 2 men who had been bothering her were also gone. According to the bartender, the 2 men had never been there before and they had never came back after that night. There have been no confirmed sightings of Henrietta since. Her landlord reported her missing to the police 2 days before Christmas. By 1995, Henrietta was presumed dead by authorities, who were even granted a search warrant to excavate a site to look for her remains in an area where there had been a potential sighting of her, but nothing was found. In 2013, police announced plans to test for touch DNA on Henrietta's purse in case an assailant had grabbed it from her. No new information came from the effort. In 2016, a new witness came forward in the case. A man claimed that he and a friend had picked up a hitchhiker he believed to be Henrietta on the last night she had been seen. The woman had told them that she was going to visit family in McKenson's. They dropped her off along the Trans-Canada Highway near Roche's Line. Given the amount of time that passed between the encounter and when the witness came forward, the account should probably be viewed with some skepticism. Authorities, however, believe the witness, who they interviewed for several hours. They say that the witness and his friend had events that day that would make that specific night stand out in their memory even after 30 years, and their description of the hitchhiker's clothing matched what Henrietta had been wearing at the Key Club that night. New searches were conducted in the area. The hitchhiker had been dropped off, following the witness's statement. 45 people combed through brush looking for clues and human remains based on the fear that if Henrietta had been out in the cold that night, she may have succumbed to the elements area where she had been dropped off. Nothing was found. If the witness's story is true, it would mean that Henrietta left to visit her son Byron in the middle of the night. While it makes sense that Henrietta would be on her way to Byron, it is strange that she left that night. The following day, she was planning to make a special trip to see him with her friend Mary Pia. They had planned to go to Mackensen's to ask Byron's Henrietta could have been baptized, with Mary Pia serving as his godmother. The two friends had been planning the visit expectantly for some time, so it is strange that Henrietta would leave without Pia. While authorities were publicly working on Henrietta's case, they were not in contact with her family, who only learned of the new efforts when they saw them on the news. Henrietta's oldest son, Chesley, has never been given the chance to speak with the police about his mother's case. His wife, Beninga Anderson, speaking to the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, alleges that she and her family were never able to get authorities to work with them. She says that when she contacted the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary about the case, an officer told her that he had no idea what case she was talking about and that he wouldn't talk to her about it even if he did. Henrietta's mother passed away in January 2018, never learning what happened to her daughter. Henrietta's son, Chesley, and his wife have two young boys. While Henrietta never achieved her dream of becoming a nurse, her best friend Mary Pia did finish school and have a career in nursing. Phatam Rol was born in Bhutan and lived there until his family was expelled from the country in 1990. He then spent time living in a refugee camp in Nepal. This is where his activism on behalf of the refugee community first began. He worked for the United Nations Refugee Agency's project for Bhutanese refugees, training teachers, and enacting programs. Phatam was eventually able to emigrate to the United States, where he helped create Bhutanese community organizations in both California and Washington state before moving to the Harrisburg, Pennsylvania area. There, he was a successful entrepreneur, owning several businesses, and continued his work serving the Bhutanese and Nepali communities, both in his own community and around the world. He was also named to Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolfe's Advisory Commission on Asian Pacific American Affairs. On February 21, 2019, Pedi left his home in Susquehanna Township, Pennsylvania around 2 p.m. He was scheduled to meet his family at 7 p.m. that evening, but never arrived as planned. His family was alarmed and called numerous other family members and friends in search of him, but no one had seen him. The following morning, they reported him missing to the police. In the early hours of February 22nd, at approximately 1 a.m., Phatam's silver Kia Forte was found abandoned on Interstate 83 on the overpass for the South Bridge, which spans the Susquehanna River in Harrisburg. There was no sign of Phatam with a car or in the area. On March 11th, Phatam's children and members of Harrisburg's Bhutanese community announced a $10,000 reward for information about Phatam's whereabouts. They also implored anyone who has seen him since February 21st to come forward. They are particularly interested in anyone who may have seen him after 2 p.m. on that day, as that information would help create a timeline of his actions that afternoon. Dale Dinwiddie was a graduate of Randolph-Macon Women's College with a bachelor's degree in art history. Following her graduation from college, she was living at home with her parents in Columbia, South Carolina, and working as a full-time babysitter while she prepared to enroll at the University of South Carolina for graduate school. On September 23, 1992, 23-year-old Dale attended a U2 concert at the Williams-Brice Stadium with a group of friends. When the concert ended at approximately 11:15 p.m., the group traveled to the Five Points area of Columbia to go to Jungle Jim's, a popular bar. Inside the bar, Dale at some point got separated from her group of friends. Not being able to find her immediately, her friends all assumed that Dale had gotten another ride home. They had all traveled to the concert and then to the bar in several cars, so everyone assumed that she had left in someone else's car. They all left the bar, leaving Dale there alone around 1 a.m. on September 24th. 15 minutes later, Dale approached the bouncer at the door to ask if he had seen her group of friends. After talking with the bouncer for about 15 minutes, Dale walked outside and began walking north on Hardin Street. The bouncer would be the last person to ever see her. At 6:15 a.m., Dale's father went into her room because her clock radio alarm had sounded and she had not turned it off. Dale was not in the room, and he realized that her bed had not been slept in. After calling around to her friends to see if anyone knew where she was, Dale's parents reported her missing at 8:30 a.m. Missing persons flyers were up around Columbia within hours of Dale's disappearance being discovered. Within a week, the search effort for her had a command center and a phone bank. Her parents had appeared on national media outlets begging for information, and her flyers were up in every state in the nation. There were hundreds of volunteers in the efforts, including local students, as well as truckers who volunteered to transport Dale's flyers across the country. Dale's disappearance was classified by law enforcement as an abduction so as to qualify it for assistance from the FBI. U2 displayed Dale's picture at several of their subsequent concerts after learning she had gone missing. The publicity generated thousands of leads, but no answers. In 2012, just 6 weeks shy of the 20th anniversary of Dale's disappearance, authorities released an age-progressed image of what Dale would potentially look like at the age of 43. Dale's family and friends continue to publicize her case in hopes of generating a lead that will help them finally find Dale. Paula Salazar was born on September 6, 2015, in Venezuela. Her mother, Andrina Bermudez Milian, was from Matarin, Monegasque, and her father, Leonardo Salazar, came from Tecapita, a town in the state of Delta Amacuro. In September 2016, a year after Paula's birth, the couple decided to move with their daughter to Ecuador in search of better opportunities. Soon after settling in Quito, Ecuador's capital, the family dynamic began to unravel due to various issues. Andrina decided to separate from Leonardo and moved with Paula to Cuenca, Ecuador's third largest city. In Cuenca, they stayed with the mother of Andrina's best friend, who generously offered them a place to stay while they looked for a new home and job opportunities. Meanwhile, due to the situation and the breakup, Leonardo chose to return to Venezuela. Later, he emigrated again, this time to Trinidad and Tobago. Leonardo had long been disabled after an accident in his youth left his left arm completely unusable, which made it difficult to find stable employment, even in Quito. After moving to Cuenca, Andrina almost entirely cut off communication with Leonardo. She informed him once that she had found work on a farm in Tabacundo. A few months after her separation from Leonardo, Andrina entered into a new relationship with Washington Andreas Imero, a local Ecuadorian and the owner of the farm where she worked. Washington came from a wealthy family. When Paula was about 18 months old, Andrina and Paula moved in with Washington. On April 7, 2019, Andrina and Washington had a child together. This marked a period of happiness and unity for the family. However, everything changed dramatically on March 27, 2020. An event occurred that profoundly impacted all involved parties' lives. During that period, the family was living well, enjoying each day on the farm, and everything seemed to be going smoothly. One day, Andreas decided to take to the flower plantations by car. However, en route, the girl became very ill. She felt dizzy and began to vomit. Left with no choice, Andreas stopped at a public restroom. As soon as they entered the restroom, Paula vomited again. Andreas decided to leave her alone for a few minutes while he went back to the car to retrieve a change of clothes since hers were dirty. Upon his return, he found Paula lying with her head in the toilet bowl. He immediately pulled her out and attempted first aid before rushing her to the hospital. When the 4-year-old was handed over to medical professionals, she showed no signs of life. Doctors declared Paula deceased after performing an initial examination. They quickly noticed inconsistencies in Andreas's story. For instance, They observed bruises on her body and face that did not match his account. Medical protocols require doctors to notify police in such situations, which they did right away. Police arrived shortly thereafter and arrested Andreas as a suspect in Paula's death. Although he claimed she had drowned in the toilet bowl, the autopsy revealed a more troubling reality. Tests showed that Paula had been dead for approximately 24 hours when she arrived at the hospital. This contradicted Andreas's timeline of events. He stated that he had given her first aid and cardiopulmonary resuscitation just 20 minutes before taking her there. Moreover, the autopsy uncovered severe injuries, several broken ribs, multiple microtraumas, a cracked spine, and sepsis, all contributing factors to her death. It became clear that Paula's death was not an accident. Her small body bore numerous recent and old injuries. Leonardo Salazar, Paula's father, learned of her death on March 33rd, days after the events transpired. His mother, who remained in Venezuela, informed him via phone. She had learned about it through a friend of Andrina's. After Leonardo left Ecuador, Andrina began a new relationship and ceased all communication with him. Consequently, for 3 days, Leonardo was unaware of the tragedy. During that time, he could only see Paula through pictures sent by Andrina and their mutual friends. Additionally, Andrina blocked Leonardo on all social media platforms, preventing any form of communication with Paula. She also cut off contact with almost all of Leonardo's relatives. It is worth noting that she turned most of their mutual friends against Leonardo by portraying him as disinterested in maintaining a relationship with Paula. Despite these challenges, Leonardo was determined to learn about his daughter's death. However, Andrina's family provided an alternative explanation for her passing. At that time, Ecuador, like much of the world, was under quarantine due to the pandemic. Understandably skeptical about this claim, Leonardo began researching virus-related deaths in the country through social media and news sites. He quickly found no children among the few victims. With the assistance of his relatives, Leonardo continued his investigation. One relative sent him a newspaper article reporting the arrest of Andrina on suspicion of killing Paula. Persistently seeking answers, he called Andrina daily until she finally returned his call 10 days later. Because her lawyers had forbidden her to, the next step Leonardo took was to create a Facebook page with an acquaintance of his. This page was dedicated to Paula. They also set up an Instagram profile called Justice Fibula. The posts they published caused a huge backlash across social media. The main goal to bring those responsible for his daughter's death to justice. On the same day that Andrina called Leonardo, she arrived at the morgue to begin arranging her daughter's funeral. Even though the prosecutor working on the case asked for more time to investigate the body, Paula's funeral still took place on April 10, 2020. Andrina did not allow a second autopsy to be performed on Paula. Thanks to information posted on social media and shared by Andrina's friends, people in her circle contacted Leonardo and told him about Paula's sad life before her death. They sent Leonardo various pieces of information they had collected, most of which were isolated recordings of conversations, photos, audio clips, and similar items. According to witnesses, ever since Paula's mother moved in with Andreas, Paula had endured abuse from both her stepfather and her own mother. Not only did Andrea allow her daughter to be treated this way, but she herself was directly involved in it. Everyone noted that Paula seemed happy and cheerful only when she was playing alone. In the presence of her stepfather, she appeared depressed, acted shy, and became suddenly very fearful. At one point, the little girl told people she trusted that her mother and stepfather would beat her if she misbehaved. One day she even confessed that as punishment, Andreas pushed her into a wall where she hit her head. Paula referred to her stepfather as nothing less than a monster and was undoubtedly very afraid of him. She constantly had nightmares and suffered from insomnia at a young age. The couple initially preferred that the girl, who was 2 years old at the time they moved into the stepfather's home, sleep alone when falling asleep. Paula often cried, but no one paid any attention to her. Additionally, her mother and stepfather forced her to manage on her own without assistance. Moreover, her mother had been teaching her how to cook since she was 2 years old, which seemed unreasonable. Paula was compelled to prepare her own breakfast and dinners because her mother preferred to sleep in the mornings and take a break from caregiving in the evenings. She simply did not want to care for her daughter. Andreina did not mind that Paula had to handle the oven by herself despite the inherent dangers. At preschool, where Andreina had enrolled Paula, the girl frequently complained of pain in her legs and back and often mentioned she could not walk. Her constant complaints, along with the bruises on her body, prompted the teacher to show her to doctors at a health center. After an examination, they concluded that Paula was being mistreated at home. The teachers then called a special police organization to investigate the abuse within Paula's family. Officials took up the case and decided to send Paula somewhere safe while they conducted their investigation. Consequently, on October 16, 2019, Paula was temporarily transferred to her uncle's care, Andreina's brother. A hearing on the matter was set for December 4, 2019. Unfortunately, the teachers who were supposed to testify never appeared for reasons unknown. As a result, they scheduled a retrial for February 27, 2020. However, once again, all the teachers failed to attend. Consequently, the court had no option but to dismiss all charges against Paula's parents and return her to her mother. 1 month later, on March 27th, Paula passed away. The exact reasons why the teachers chose not to attend either hearing remain unknown. It is speculated that Andreina might have bribed or persuaded them that although Paula had some issues, it wasn't due to any wrongdoing by her parents. After Paula's tragic death, Andreas was placed in protective custody during the investigation. Soon appealed this decision, resulting in a hearing on June 12, 2020. At the hearing, which was held via video conference, the judge set aning order and determined Andreas could be released to house arrest. However, during the hearing, Andreas announced that he was withdrawing his appeal. At that time, Leonardo was still conducting a social media campaign and asked his subscribers for financial support to travel from Trinidad and Tobago to Ecuador. His goal was to file a complaint against Andreina, Paula's mother, before it became too late. Andreina had not yet been charged and remained free. Fortunately, Leonardo managed to secure sufficient financial aid, as well as free legal advice from 2 Ecuadorian lawyers, Oswaldo and Alejandro. They generously offered him support and assistance with the lawsuit. Leonardo faced significant challenges to reach Ecuador. He had to cross the border between Trinidad and Venezuela by rafting across dangerous waters and then travel across rugged terrain. Due to the pandemic, all regular maritime and land borders of Venezuela were closed. Thus, only a few flights were available to a handful of countries. Once Leonardo arrived into Chia State, he crossed into Colombia over hazardous terrain. From there, he took a bus to Ipiales and continued onward through hills and plains until reaching Rumichaca Bridge, the border between Colombia and Ecuador. Upon crossing into Ecuador, Leonardo took a cab to Quito. On June 30th, he immediately met with a lawyer upon arrival. The bereaved father filed a complaint against his ex-girlfriend, so she would also be considered a suspect in Paula's murder. By July 6, 2020, an indictment was issued against Andreina. She appeared in court where it was decided that house arrest would suffice instead of full custody. In November 2020, the initial hearing for the case took place. Although a specific trial date had not yet been determined at that time, participation and discussions were intense. Leonardo's attorney voiced concerns about Andreina's potential escape risk as she had previously attempted suicide using pills. The lawyer requested that Andreina be fitted with an electronic monitoring bracelet. The judge this request and also reduced her required court appearances to once a week instead of twice. However, shortly after, Andreina requested a reconsideration regarding the necessity of wearing the electronic bracelet. Consequently, another hearing was held on November 16th to review this decision. These developments inevitably caused delays in the trial proceedings, but eventually, the judge set a new date for December. Despite limited media coverage of Andreas and Andreina's trial, much information found its way onto social media platforms. However, due to the pandemic dominating news coverage at the time, some details remained unreported. The trial began on January 14, 2021. At that point, no final decision had been made regarding Andreina's alternative imprisonment options, while Andres remained detained at the regional detention center. The trial was conducted behind closed doors, with no media representatives present. Some participants attended via video link to ensure proceedings continued smoothly despite restrictions. According to testimony from the doctor who performed Paula's autopsy, several disturbing findings were made. Nearly all of her spinal discs had been rebuilt. She suffered broken ribs, some of which had fused naturally over time, and she displayed symptoms like nail stigmata, where nails grow into the skin, as well as bruises and scratches on her face and body. Furthermore, there was fluid accumulation in her lungs and serious injuries, such as scars on her head and lacerations on her colon. These medical findings suggested prolonged physical trauma before Paula's death and became critical evidence in understanding what transpired during her final days. The later injuries were what caused the infection to develop into sepsis, ultimately leading to death. The autopsy report confirmed that by the time took Paula to the hospital, she had been deceased for approximately 24 hours. The extent of her internal and external injuries revealed the severity of cruelty she had endured, as well as the negligence of her guardians who never once sought medical attention for her. Additionally, Paula was malnourished, underweight, and too small for her age with clear mineral and nutritional deficiencies. Regarding Paula's injuries, her mother and Rana tried to persuade family and friends that Paula had numerous psychological problems. She asserted that these issues led to self-harm behaviors which were attempts by Paula to attract attention. According to Andrena, when Paula's younger brother was born, Paula began lacking parental attention, stopped sleeping at night, and attempted to manipulate everyone through crying. In October 2019, even though Paula was supposed to stay with her uncle per Aboud's decision, she actually continued staying at her parents' house most of the time and only slept at her uncle's house occasionally. This indicates that measures taken by authorities did not achieve their intended outcomes. Furthermore, it was established that in 2017, shortly after Leonardo's departure from Ecuador, Paula began experiencing abuse, likely starting right after Enrina entered into a relationship with Andreas. At the trial attended by over 40 witnesses from the accusing party, it was confirmed that Paula endured abuse for at least 3 years of her short life. At the final hearing before the judge delivered the verdict, Andriana claimed full responsibility for the child's abuse. She admitted to beating Paula with a belt and sometimes using her fists. Through this statement, Andriana attempted to deflect blame away from her partner Andreas. She stated emphatically that he was innocent, that he had no involvement in the matter, and that he had never mistreated Paula. Andrena also mentioned that she had reprimanded her daughter for causing issues with her new husband. Breaking up with him meant returning to the streets and losing the financial stability she could only gain through his support. Taking care of her daughter was not her main concern. Upon reviewing Paula's circumstances, the judges expressed concern for the couple's newborn son. However, they noted that this child, unlike Paula, was never abused. It is worth mentioning that Andreas opted to exercise his right to remain silent and has not commented on the incident since his arrest on February 3, 2021. Paula's trial concluded with both defendants being found guilty of murdering the girl. The maximum penalty for this crime is 13 years. Leonardo's original attorneys and the prosecution sought the maximum punishment for the perpetrators. However, considering an aggravating factor that Paula was just 4 years old and unable to defend herself, the chief judge sentenced Andrena and Andreas to 17 years and 4 months in prison. According to Ecuadorian law, convicted individuals have 3 days to appeal a verdict. The couple, as anticipated, indicated their intention to do so immediately. Despite being sentenced to 17 years 4 months in prison, Andre remained under house arrest instead of being jailed directly. She utilized her opportunity to appeal, necessitating higher court confirmation of her incarceration sentence. Meanwhile, she continues to follow the previously imposed measures. This situation is markedly different from Andreas' case. He was detained upon his appearance at the hospital with a deceased girl. Public outrage has been palpable over Andriana remaining at large. Of particular note is Leonardo's anger and concern over her potentially evading justice. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.